When I pulled into my driveway that evening, the first thing I noticed was the bright red "Sold" sign hammered into my front yard. At first I thought maybe it was a mistake or a prank, some ridiculous joke one of my friends would pull. I sat there in my car for a moment, staring at it, heart racing. I grabbed my bag and rushed to the door, only to find a strange couple standing on my porch, smiling politely like they were waiting for me. "Can I help you?" I asked, voice shaking more than I liked. The woman, mid-30s maybe, held out her hand. "Hi. We're the Martins. Just wanted to meet the previous owner." "The what?" I blinked at them, feeling like the ground had shifted under my feet. Mr. Martin laughed awkwardly. "Previous owner? You? We closed this morning. The agent said the house would be empty." I tried to process it. "Empty? Closed?" "I didn't sell my house," I said, the words scraping my throat raw. They exchanged a look. The kind of look people give when they realize they're dealing with a crazy person. I shoved past them, fumbling with my keys, heart hammering so hard I thought I'd faint. But when I opened the door, everything, my couch, my photos, my books, was gone. The place was stripped bare. Panicked, I called my brother, Dave. No answer. I called my mom. Straight to voicemail. Finally, I got through to my Aunt Lorna. She sounded calm. Too calm. "Oh, sweetie, don't get upset. We've been trying to do what's best for you," she said, like she was talking to a stubborn toddler. "What the hell are you talking about?" I snapped. "You don't need a luxury home at your age," she said, sighing. "It's too much for you. Big mortgage, maintenance. You'll be better off somewhere simpler, somewhere safer." I could barely breathe. "You sold my house behind my back?" "Not behind your back," she said gently. "We had power of attorney. After your accident last year, you signed a few papers. We thought you understood." I remembered the accident, the months of surgeries, medications, endless forms shoved in my face when I was too weak to argue. I felt sick, betrayed, like a chunk of my life had been ripped away while I wasn't looking. "We already found you a lovely condo downtown," she added cheerfully, as if that was supposed to fix everything. I hung up without another word. The Martins were still standing awkwardly by their car. I couldn't even look at them. That night, I sat on the curb outside my former house, feeling more lost than I ever had in my life. The world had shifted and no one had asked if I was ready. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if anyone even cared. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car, staring at the dark shape of the house until the sun came up. I kept expecting someone to call and say it had all been a mistake. But no one did. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay there. I drove aimlessly for hours, ending up in a grim little motel off the highway. The kind of place with buzzing fluorescent lights and a faint smell of bleach that never quite covers the mildew. I stared at the stained ceiling and thought about everything I'd lost. Not just the house but the feeling of having a place that was mine. Every photo, every old letter, every ridiculous thing I kept in the junk drawer, gone. Sold off, boxed up, or tossed away by people who thought they knew what was best for me. Late that night, Dave finally called back. "Look, man," he said, voice low like he was expecting me to scream. "We didn't want to do it this way. But you weren't handling things well after the accident. You had no right," I said. My voice barely sounded like mine. "You were hurting yourself even if you didn't see it. Living alone in that huge place, it wasn't good for you." Aunt Lorna stepped in because someone had to. I almost laughed. As if selling my life out from under me was some kind of intervention. "You have no idea what you took from me," I said quietly. There was a long silence on the other end. Then he said, "Maybe it's time to start fresh." Start fresh. Like it was that easy. Like homes grew on trees, like trust wasn't something fragile that once broken could never really be pieced back together. I hung up again. No point talking to ghosts. A week later, I finally visited the condo they'd set up for me. It was tiny, sterile, and smelled faintly of new paint and cheap carpeting. There was a bowl of plastic fruit on the counter and a folded brochure on the coffee table that read, "Welcome home," in cheerful blue letters. I stood there for a long time, feeling like a guest in someone else's life. That night, I made a decision. They thought I needed saving. Maybe I did, but not by them. Not like this. If I was going to rebuild, it would be on my own terms. Not out of the pieces they left me, but from the ground up. I packed a bag, grabbed the few things I still owned, and left the keys on the counter. I didn't know where I was going yet. But for the first time in a long time, it would be my choice. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. I turned my phone off, tossed it in a gas station trash can somewhere 2 towns over, and drove until the city skyline shrank into nothing. There was no grand plan. No maps, no list of places to stay. Just the steady hum of the engine and a feeling in my chest like something half-healed and angry was finally waking up. I found a small town by accident. A sleepy place where the buildings leaned a little in the wind and everyone's front porch had a rocking chair. Cheap rent, no questions asked. I paid cash for a tiny room above a bookstore run by an old man named Walter, who didn't bother asking why I had no forwarding address. For the first time in months I slept through the night. Days blurred together in a good way. I took odd jobs, stacking books, fixing broken shelves, painting old porches for cash. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what my life used to be. But it was mine. Every drop of sweat, every aching muscle, every dollar in my pocket. Mine. I didn't think much about the house anymore. It was just a place now. A place someone else lived in. A shell of a life that no longer fit me. But sometimes, late at night, I thought about the people who had taken it from me. Not out of hate exactly. More like disappointment. They hadn't just underestimated me, they'd decided for me that my story was over. That I was too broken, too tired, too old to fight for it. They were wrong. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the bookstore's lights flickered on, Walter handed me a set of keys. "Back room's empty," he said, shrugging. "If you ever want to start something of your own." I turned the keys over in my hand, feeling their weight. Maybe it wouldn't be much. Maybe it would take years. But it would be built with my own hands, stone by stone, mistake by mistake. Nobody was going to decide my life for me ever again. For weeks, I just carried the keys in my pocket like a secret promise. Some days I almost forgot they were there. Other days I gripped them so hard they left little red marks in my palm. Bit by bit, though, I started putting the space together. Cleaned out the dust, painted the walls a soft, stormy blue. It felt good, not like rebuilding a life someone else wanted for me but creating something I chose. At first it was simple. A small coffee corner, a few chairs, shelves lined with second-hand books and little crafts from people around town. I called it Second Story, a half-joke, half-truth. My second story. A new beginning. Locals trickled in. Some came for the coffee, others stayed for the quiet. Word spread, slow but steady. A place where no one cared who you were before you walked in. A place where you could start over without explaining yourself. I didn't talk much about my past. It felt like another life, like remembering someone else's bad dream. But sometimes when someone would wander in, tired, lost, looking for something they couldn't name, I'd see a glimpse of who I used to be. And I'd hand them a cup of coffee, point to a comfortable chair and say, "Take your time. You're welcome here." I never heard from my family again. I think they told themselves a story where I lived happily ever after in the condo they picked for me, grateful and compliant. Let them have that version if they needed it. I had my own version now. Years later, on a slow autumn evening, I stood outside Second Story watching the golden leaves swirl along the sidewalk. My hands were rougher, my hair a little grayer, but when I smiled, it reached all the way into my chest. I had built something real out of the ruins they left me. Not in spite of what they did. Because I chose not to let it be the end. Some nights, when the shop was quiet and the last customers had gone, I'd lock the door, kill the lights, and sit by the window with a cup of coffee, staring out into the dark. I thought about the way life had cracked apart. How, at the time, it had felt like falling into a void so deep I'd never climb out. How it turned out that the fall was never the end, it was just the part where you learned how to land. Walter passed away the following winter. Left the bookstore to me in a letter so short it barely filled half a page. "You know what to do." I did. Second Story grew. I knocked down the wall between the coffee shop and the bookstore. Held late-night poetry readings, built a little corner where kids could scribble their own stories on the walls. Some of their drawings are still there, dragons, spaceships, stick figures with wild, bright smiles. Strangers became regulars. Regulars became friends. Friends became family, the kind you build for yourself when the old blueprints don't fit anymore. Sometimes people ask me why I started it. Why I stayed in a forgotten town when there were shinier places waiting. I just smiled and said, some stories are better when you write them slow. I never got the house back. But honestly, I didn't need it. Brick and wood are just a shell. The worn floorboards, the crooked shelves, the people who laugh too loudly and stay too late. This was my real home. And for the first time in a long, long time, I knew. I hadn't been broken. I'd been rebuilt. One evening, just as the last light was draining from the sky, I saw a car I recognized pull up across the street. It was Dave. I watched from the window, hidden by the shadows inside. He stood there for a while, shifting on his feet, staring at the glowing sign above the shop door like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to come in. For a long moment, I thought about unlocking the door. About stepping out onto the sidewalk and letting the past spill into the present. but I didn't move. Eventually he gave up, climbed back into his car and drove away. The red taillights disappeared into the dark, like a thread finally snapping loose. I didn't feel anger. Not anymore. Just a strange, quiet sadness for the things we'd both lost, and the years that couldn't be stitched back together. Some things you survive. Some things you simply outgrow. And some things, no matter how hard you want them to be different, stay broken. I went back to wiping tables, humming under my breath. A few minutes later, the door chimed and a group of teenagers burst in, laughing, the cold night air clinging to their jackets. "Hey, Mr. J," one of them called. "You gonna read us a ghost story tonight?" I smiled, grabbed an old battered book from the counter and waved them over. "Only if you're ready for the good ones," I said. They cheered and scrambled for seats. The world moved on and so did I, one page, one night, one choice at a time. Whatever story Dave had wanted from me, it wasn't mine anymore. I had a new one now. And I was exactly where I was meant to be. Years passed the way summer fades into fall, slow enough you don't notice at first, then all at once. The bookstore and cafe became something bigger than I ever imagined. People started calling it a landmark, a hidden gem. I got used to seeing new faces walk through the door with wide eyes and hopeful smiles. Writers, drifters, small-town dreamers, somehow they all found their way here. Sometimes I'd sit on the front steps in the early morning, coffee in hand, and watch the town wake up. Kids racing each other to school. Mr. Patterson watering the plants outside his barber shop. The old train rumbling by, slow and stubborn just like always. I was older now. Slower in some ways. Wiser in others. But I wasn't lonely. One afternoon, a girl about 10 years old wandered into the shop with a backpack twice her size. She dropped it by a chair, grabbed a book from the shelf, and settled in like she owned the place. When I asked her where she was from, she shrugged and said, "Nowhere yet. I'm still finding it." I laughed, a real, full laugh that felt like it came from every piece of the life I'd fought to build. "Take your time," I told her. "You'll know when it's yours." And in that moment I realized, everything I had lost, everything I had feared was the end of me, had only been the beginning. Somewhere along the way, without even noticing, I had become the kind of person I needed when I was lost. Not by holding on to what was taken from me, but by opening my hands and letting it go. Home wasn't the house I came back to find sold. Home was the life I chose to create after. And it was more beautiful than anything I had left behind. One late evening, just before closing time, I found myself standing behind the counter, staring at the old shelf of books Walter had left me. It had been years since his passing, but his presence still lingered in the little corners of Second Story. In the smell of coffee beans and old paper, in the stories that filled these walls. A soft knock on the door broke me from my thoughts. I looked up and there was a woman standing outside looking in. She had the same lost, searching expression I'd had when I first stumbled into town all those years ago. I walked over and opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice kind. She smiled nervously, and her eyes flickered over to the corner of the room where a few of the young writers were hunched over their notebooks. "I've heard a lot about this place." I didn't know if it was okay to come in. I didn't want to interrupt. I nodded, gesturing for her to step inside. "This is the perfect time. No interruptions here. Just stories." She hesitated for a moment, then stepped in. I could see she was still unsure, maybe even scared, like she was waiting for someone to tell her she didn't belong. "Take a seat," I said gently. "Everyone's a storyteller here." She nodded and found a quiet spot in the corner, pulling out a small notebook from her bag. The same kind of notebook I used to carry when I was just trying to figure out who I was. I went back to my cleaning, but I kept an eye on her, watching as she scribbled in her notebook, her face lighting up with each new word that seemed to pour out of her. There was something beautiful about that moment, the way a person could still find themselves even when they didn't know how to begin. I smiled, leaning against the counter. I used to be her. Then I realized I still was. The truth was, I didn't know if I had ever fully found myself. Maybe you never do. But you find pieces of you in every choice, in every person you meet, in every story that feels like home. As she wrote, I thought about how much I had changed, how much we change, and how sometimes, it's only in looking back that you can see how far you've come. The house, the life I once thought was everything, it was just one chapter. And this was where the real story began. The door chimed again as more customers wandered in, and I watched the woman smile to herself as she wrote the final words in her notebook. I could see it now, the beginnings of a new life, one page at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a deep peace settle inside me. There was no rush. No need to figure it all out. The chapters would come when they were meant to. All I had to do was keep turning the page. The years that followed were quieter. Life in the small town had settled into a rhythm, like the slow creak of the old wooden floorboards underfoot. I'd become a part of the landscape now, not in the way you blend into the background but in the way something solid and steady becomes the heartbeat of the place. I still kept Second Story running, of course. It was my refuge, my anchor. But it was also a place for others to come and find their own stories. The ones who needed to heal. The ones who wanted to be heard. And sometimes, just sometimes, the ones who came in lost and left with something new to hold on to. One crisp autumn morning as I was locking up to go home, I found a letter slipped under the door. It wasn't uncommon. Sometimes people left notes, thank you letters, or even short stories. But this one was different. I unfolded the paper slowly, reading the familiar handwriting. I've never been good at goodbyes, but I guess this is one. I've made peace with the past. With what was lost, with what couldn't be saved. But most importantly, I've made peace with myself. And for that, I'll always be grateful. You gave me something when I needed it the most, hope. And I didn't even realize I needed that until you showed me how it felt to breathe again. So thank you. More than you'll ever know. It was from her. The woman who had sat in the corner that first night. The one who had walked in searching for something and left with words that had healed her. She'd gone on to write a book. A real one. It was on the shelf of Second Story now, her name proudly displayed on the cover. I placed the letter down on the counter and leaned back, a deep, quiet smile spreading across my face. The past didn't define me anymore. I wasn't the person I once was. I wasn't the house I lost or the dreams that others had for me. I wasn't even the failure I thought I might be at one point. I was the story I chose to write. And that was enough. A few days later, I pulled the letter from the counter, tucked it into the back of a drawer, and picked up a fresh journal. The pages were blank, ready to be filled. I didn't know what the next chapter would look like, but I had learned by now that the beauty of life wasn't in the ending. It was in the writing. It's been years now since I first walked into this town, unsure of what I was looking for. Time has a way of softening the sharp edges of regret, of loss. In some ways, the wounds I carried in my heart have healed. In others, they've become the stories I tell. Every morning, I wake up with a quiet sense of purpose. The small town outside my window is still as sleepy as ever, but inside Second Story, it's always bustling with life. I've learned that the real joy isn't in the things you accumulate, it's in the moments you share, the small connections that make you feel like you belong, even when the world feels chaotic. I've met 1,000 faces since I opened the doors of this little shop. Some are strangers at first, but they leave as part of my story. We all carry our own baggage, our own struggles, but we all also have the power to create something beautiful from them. I've seen it happen over and over again. Someone walks in tired and worn and leaves a little lighter, a little freer. The house. It's gone. The memories of it have faded, and I've stopped looking for pieces of my past to fill the gaps. My home isn't a place anymore, it's a feeling. It's the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Some people never find their way back to themselves. Some spend their lives chasing things that will never truly matter. But I've learned that sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find out what truly matters. And so, I sit here now, looking out the window, watching the world move in its own rhythm, feeling a sense of peace I never thought I'd know. The story's still unfolding. There's still more to write. But I know that whatever comes next, I'll be ready for it. Because, in the end, the only thing that matters is this. I have built a life that's mine. Not because it was handed to me. Not because I was saved. But because I chose it. And that's the most powerful story of all.